All right, we're gonna get started with our final panel discussion of the day, and as I said before, this is couldn't be more timely, and I would say the most urgent topic that we're talking about right now, Amendment 2 in the future of education freedom in Kentucky. So I want to just briefly introduce our panelists. I'm so excited. We've got State Senator Lindsey Tichenor with us here today. Senator Tichenor is from Smithfield, and her and her husband, Bowen, have 4 children, and she has been just a champion for family values, for educational freedom, for standing up, for protecting our kids in a variety of contexts in her time in the state Senate, and we're just super excited to have Senator Tichenor with us. I'm also excited that we have Jim Waters, who's president of the Bluegrass Institute for Public Policy Solutions, with us. It is Kentucky's first and only free market think tank, and they have done tremendous work on a lot of issues, but particularly education freedom and school choice. And so excited, thankful, Jim, for you being here with us. Just a short programming note: Pastor Jerry Stevenson was going to be with us from Louisville on this panel, but he had ended up having to go visit family, and so he's not with us. But I'm excited. We have Jesse Green from the Family Foundation team with us. Jesse is our legal and policy advisor, and I don't know if I got to share this with the whole room here yet, or if it's been shared, but he also just passed the bar exam in Kentucky, so very, very excited for Jesse. And he's been really leading our educational efforts on Amendment 2. Jesse, how many, you've probably spoken at 10 or 15 different gatherings just in the last 2 months on school choice. So,
and we got a few more on the calendar as well.
Yes. So really excited to have this panel. All right, so I'm going to start with Senator Tichenor. We're, 25, 24 days away from the election, but there's still a lot of folks in Kentucky that don't really understand Amendment 2, why it's on the ballot. So can you explain how we kind of got to this point, what Amendment 2 is, and the need for the General Assembly to pass it to even give us an opportunity to vote on it this November?
Absolutely, I'm happy to. So really, Amendment 2 is here because we continue, regardless of what legislation the General Assembly passes, we continue for it to be struck down in the courts based on the wording and the language in our Constitution and their interpretation of it. And I want to make note that it's interesting that the Supreme Court level keeps striking this down, and if you didn't catch it in the news recently, a lot of our Supreme Court races are bought by teacher unions. Jefferson County Teachers Association just put $200,000 in the race against the Supreme Court candidate in the back of the room. So I just want you guys to be aware of that they're heavily influenced, and that's really an unfortunate thing. And so this interpretation of our Constitution, the amendment would clarify what language has been the sticking point on some of the legislation that we have passed. In 2017, we passed charter bill laws, which are all still on our books. We then later passed the funding mechanism for charter schools, and that was questioned in the courts and is now on hold in the courts as well. And 2021, we passed educational opportunity accounts, which would be funded by private donors, and those donors would get a tax deduction. And there was some tricky interpretation of the levy of taxes in a section of our Constitution, and so that was struck down as well. So what we're seeing in the state of Kentucky, if you follow education and the numbers, we don't do well, and we haven't done well for a long time, and we continue to sink backwards in our data. If you can go onto our website, legislature.ky.gov, and look up the data district profiles, and you'll see that Kentucky reading proficiency is at 44% at the high school level. Math is at 33%, yet our graduation rate is at 91%. It's an absolute confusing mess of why we're passing out diplomas to kids who are not reading proficiently and able to do math in a proficient level. So it's something that needs to be addressed. We have got to focus a different path other than just dumping money into a system that continues to fail its children. And that's what Amendment 2 is about.
Can we put, I know on the next slide, we actually have the ballot language of what Amendment 2 is, just so everyone can see it. We also have it up on our website, on our resource page at kentuckyfamily.org/Amendment 2. But I think it's really important, a couple things I just want to mention so I don't forget. There's 2 proposed constitutional amendments on the Kentucky ballot. These will be the last 2 things on your ballot. And I know someone else mentioned, but you will have to go all the way down to the very end of your ballot to ensure that you vote on these constitutional amendments, and particularly Amendment 2 being the last one. And again, important, I'm not going to read the whole language, but again, Amendment 2 does not set any policy. It does not set any policy. It would just open the door for a discussion, a debate on school choice policies in the future, because that has been shut down right now as we sit here. So just wanted to point that out. Jim, Kentucky is one of only 2 states without an active school choice program. What are other states doing on school choice, especially those that are surrounding Kentucky? And if we can pull up that map too that shows where Kentucky sits on school choice compared to many of our surrounding states.
That's a good question and an important question. Most other states have some type of educational options. Many of them have more than one. Many have both a public option, which is public charter schools, as Senator Tichenor mentioned, that have been passed here and funded, struck down in the lower court, still to be heard in the higher court there, and also, of course, private options, non-public schools. We have 80 different programs in the country involving non-public school education. 1 million students in America are in those programs. Almost 4 million students are attending a charter school today through a school choice program in their state. So this is happening all around us. And one of the important things to understand is if you are supportive of public education, if you are supportive of improving public education, then supporting school choice is one of the best things you can do for public education. In 1990, when the Kentucky Education Reform Act was passed, the state of Florida's public education system trailed Kentucky in most of the key academic areas of reading, math, and science. Today, the Florida public education system is recognized as being near the top of the nation and in some categories at the top of the nation in terms of their performance, and they've increased spending less than Kentucky has over that time. Kentucky's public education system has remained largely where it was when CARA was passed. What's the major difference in the 2 states? Florida has offered its parents increasing and expanded numbers of choices and kinds of school choices. 500,000 students in Florida are going to a better school today for them than they would have been able to without a school choice program. That dynamic of choice for parents has forced the public system in Florida to say, we better step up our game, we better improve. So the opponents of this want to make this about either or. They want to say this is either public education or it's choice for parents. That's a false choice, and it's a bunch of nonsense, quite frankly. This is both and. This is both public education and expanded options. If you're happy with where your child or grandchild's attending school, this amendment will actually solidify and even make your ability to send them there even stronger. This won't change anything about that. But for those families who need something different and who need a better option, a school that works better for their child, this amendment, passing this amendment will be a step toward the legislature being able to do that. To add to what Senator Tichenor said about the performance, if you drill down to our minority students in Kentucky, only 15% of our minority kids were proficient in math in the latest Kentucky Summative Assessment released just last week. About that same number proficient in reading. If you can't read by the 4th grade, you are behind for the rest of your academic career, because we're set up to learn to read by the 4th grade so you can read to learn the remainder of your academic career. So these programs in other states are not just about giving some parents a different school for their child. They're about creating the proper kind of pressure on the public system to step up their game so that all of our children have access to a great education. A rising tide really does lift all boats. And one other thing I'll say about this is Mark Twain is credited with saying that when the world comes to an end, he wants to be in Kentucky because we're 20 years behind everybody else. And that's usually not a good thing. That's usually not a good thing. But in this case, it actually has an upside. And the upside is we can see all of the things that have worked, all of the policy that's been effective, and what's happened all around the country, and we can avoid those pitfalls, avoid those potholes, if you will, and we can have the best, most robust school choice policy in America. We can do it here in Kentucky because we have the advantage of seeing what has worked and what has not worked. What is not an option is to maintain the status quo. As long as the public system has no pressure applied to it, it will not improve. So you do not hear me saying I'm opposed to public education. You hear me saying let's confront the truth about what's really happening and let's do what we know is working around the country to improve the educational experience that all of our students have. I've actually had opponents tell me on this, and this is it. I've actually had opponents say, well, you know, when I tell them, hey, almost every other state has choice, they say, well, we're just smarter than everybody else. I mean, we're just ahead of everybody else. So that's the mindset. But the fact is, when we have options and competition, it's good for everybody. So thank you.
Well, let's drill down a little bit further about some of the crazy things that are being said about what Amendment 2 is designed to do. Because I think this is really important, especially as we, the last several weeks of the campaign, folks are going to see even more ads on both sides. So there's a couple of different ones that I want to just let any of y'all respond to these. So we hear a version of our governor, for example. Public dollars belong to public schools, period. We hear, I've heard arguments, in fact, I did a program with a gentleman who essentially said, school choice just in general is really just a way to bail out failing churches. And that's really what all this is about, propping up churches. I've heard versions of arguments that this is really designed about shutting down public schools. It's about defunding public schools. It's about firing teachers. I'm just throwing out some of the nice things that they've said. But I think it's really important to directly respond. So I'm actually going to go down the line and let everyone respond. And whoever wants to jump in first, jump in.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Am I on? I'm on. I'll jump in first on this because the governor talks about public dollars are for public schools, and I respectfully disagree with that. The dollars are not for schools. The dollars are not for a system. I could care less about a system. I heard the lieutenant governor the other day in Louisville, and I was asked to respond in an interview there to her nonsense. And she said systems, I don't know how many times. She never said the word students, never once. She talked about we can't fund two different systems. This is not about propping up a system. It's ironic that the people who talk about propping up a church, they want to use the money to prop up a system. But the dollars, what are the dollars for? What are education dollars for? Thank you, thank you. We need to say that as many times as possible between now and November 5th. The dollars are for the students. If a student gets educated in a traditional public school, in a public charter school, in a non-public private school, whether it's faith-based or secular or whatever it is, if they get the education they need in that school, those dollars have been properly used. That is what they're for. That's what they're for. Now, the other thing I want to say on this is you'll hear somebody talking about we cannot divert public dollars from public schools. You know, it's funny because we use public dollars for all kinds of public goods in other ways. I mean, think about Medicare recipients. They take their dollars and they take them to the provider that works best for them. If they take them, since we're in Lexington, they take them to UK hospital. Maybe they Maybe they went there before. But maybe then St. Joe or whatever one of the other hospitals, maybe they develop a center for treating an illness that they had that they particularly need. So they decide to leave the University of Kentucky Hospital and go to another hospital. We don't say, well, you can't divert dollars away from the one hospital to go to the other. Why? Because the dollars don't belong to the hospital. They belong for the patient to get the care that they need. And so we give them the dignity of making the decision about what is in their own personal best interest. And look, I don't care how great a school is, and we've got some great public schools in our state, and we've got a lot of great teachers and folks working there. But no matter how great you are, you're never going to be able to meet the need of every single student. And we've got to make sure that options are there so that students get what they need. So I say let the students, let's fund the students and let the system adjust, let it go away, let another one come. Let's fund the students and not the system.
Jesse, you've got experience both in private and public school, and as we shared, you've been a passionate advocate and has been around the state quite a bit, just even in the last few weeks. Why are you such a passionate advocate for school choice in Amendment 2?
So going into, or as a prelude to this answer, I must disclose that I am not originally from Kentucky, unfortunately.
That's okay. That's okay.
My family is originally from what I like to refer to as the People's Republic of Illinois. So when I was a child growing up, we lived in Springfield, Illinois. It's the capital. It's where a lot of the corruption in that state happens. And my parents were not comfortable sending me and my siblings to the public schools that were in Springfield, Illinois, because they had heard stories about what went on in those public schools, and they wanted to make sure that me and my brothers received a strong Christian quality education. And so they sacrificed, and they sent me and my brothers to a small Christian private school that was hosted by the church we went to. The church's name, Westside Christian Church. Springfield Christian School was the name of that school. And it had about 20 to 25 students per grade. So pretty small in terms of the private school scale. And the education that I received there was not only good because I was educated in Christian values and brought up in a strong Christian environment where the teachers could teach biblical concepts without having to worry about being fired or having pushback from groups looking to sue them over teaching biblical concepts. But it also was the strongest education that I received. We actually went over things like the English language. We learned the rules of grammar. We diagrammed sentences. And and those are things that people my age who were in the public schools at that time were not getting. They were pumped through a system who was just designed to make sure that they got graduated, and they were another check mark on the graduation list so they could have that 90-some% graduation rate. And as I grew up, I realized how blessed my family was, and me individually, to be able to have an opportunity to receive such a quality education. And now that I was able to go to college at Asbury University on a competitive scholarship, which allowed me to go through there with very little debt. And then I just recently graduated law school, and I received a full tuition scholarship to Ohio State's law school, which once again helped me avoid a bunch of debt, which allowed me to take a job like this that is lower paying than some of my colleagues from law school who went to big firms and making the big bucks. And I realized how much that private education meant to my success in education, and my success now coming into the career field. And I realized that a lot of families don't have the same ability to make the sacrifices that my parents had. It wasn't easy on us. We I did not take vacations as a child. The first vacation I took was probably in high school after we had moved to Kentucky. My family didn't eat out very much. We had to find ways to save money as much as we could. But there are families that are working paycheck to paycheck. There are families who might be a single-parent household who can't afford to have that extra expense of homeschooling or going to private school. And I want every single child, especially every single Kentucky child, to have the same opportunities that I had to be able to succeed and get to that moment, or this moment that I've been able to get to because of my parents' sacrifice and my experience in a private Christian school. And Amendment 2 is Kentucky's way of being able to provide families those same opportunities. And so I really hope that we see Kentucky voters pass Amendment 2 and give Kentucky families and Kentucky children these opportunities so they can succeed going forward and when they have to compete against kids in the surrounding states.
Yeah, thank you. And that's what we want. We want to tell more of those stories in Kentucky for Kentucky families and for Kentucky students. Senator Tichenor, your church recently started a tuition-free school for students in your local area. I wanted you to have an opportunity to share a little bit more about that ministry and why y'all felt called to start it, and to even speak to the kind of revolution that we're experiencing in opportunities for folks and needs for folks to start more schools, more other ways, co-ops. I mean, we've really seen an explosion in the last few years, and Amendment 2 would open the door, I believe, even more for that. Could you share a little bit?
Yeah, it absolutely could. I will say, though, we are a donation-based, tuition-free school, not because we expect A2 to pass and us to get money. Our church won't touch government money. We do not need the state to rescue us. We serve a God who owns a cattle on 1,000 hills, and he'll be the provision to educate our children. But I think it is a powerful movement that is happening. And for me, it happened in 2020 when they closed our doors, when they masked our kids, when we saw what was going on the inside of schools, in the books, in the education curriculum, and they're really, truly a very intentional effort to keep parents out. I started thinking we have to have something different. We have to have something that parents can go to, and we worked hard for the last 4 years to try and come up with some model for our school to start, and we were blessed by our pastor saying yes. And our church is called Salt and Light Church, which I think has been kind of a theme throughout the day here, and I think that's funny. And but our school is called First Principles Academy, and our goal isn't just that we educate our students, but that we educate them for liberty. And we're teaching a message called the principle approach, and it's based off of the 7 principles of liberty and how our nation was founded, which are all biblical principles. And we've lost that as well. And our churches, as our churches move forward, and just like Dr. Barna said, our children should be the target. They should be the goal. And they shouldn't just be the goal on a Wednesday night. They shouldn't just be the goal on a Sunday morning for an hour. They need to be the goal 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And there's no reason every church should not be opening their doors to educate not just their own church members' children, but be open to the public, because the public needs it too. And we have seen our church we've only been open for about a month. We opened, I guess maybe 6 weeks on the 4th of September. We opened after Labor Day, and I cannot tell you how many new faces we have. Most of our new students that we have 63 students, 41 families. Most of them are not from our church. It is a ministry. It's a ministry to our community. So we're excited about it. We're thrilled about it. But this is, A2 would open the door for more options for families in general, whether your church is going to take any money or not. We need those options for our kids. And I hope that we can be an example to the churches to step up and step out and really, truly have faith that God does want to provide for us a way to raise our children up in the Lord.
Well, and I know too, you bring up a good point, because one of the other concerns that we've heard from some, maybe some in the homeschool community, and we share this concern, is government intrusion into homeschooling, government intrusion, or into private schools. When you and I were visiting Senator Tichenor, you made a really good point. I'd like you to share with the audience. Remember, the heart of the General Assembly already made that crystal clear in the original school choice bill that passed in 2021. Could you talk a little bit about the language that was in that bill? Because I think it speaks to where the kind of policies that the General Assembly would look to if Amendment 2 was to pass would in no way encroach upon any freedoms or rights for our homeschool community or private schools in Kentucky.
Yeah, and I can't breach this topic without acknowledging Senator Jay Williams and the work that he did in the 90s to ensure that the language of homeschools was incorporated, not as a standalone word. It's not in our statutes, and that was very intentional to protect it. Homeschools are recognized as non-certified schools and private schools. They are not noted as a homeschool because we didn't want to target the homeschool community in any way. The EOAs were written, educational opportunity accounts. Again, those would be funded by private businesses, private taxpayers. They would get a tax write-off, and it was very specifically noted that if anyone received money, they did not have to change their creed, their principles, and the method that they teach. And that was written very intentionally to protect that money if it was funding a religious tutor or a curriculum or a homeschool, if they were to take that money. And again, that's private tax dollars that would be going into a specific fund in order to give those opportunity scholarships out to students. So they are very, very smart in that language. I would encourage you to look it up. It was HB 563 in the 2021 session, and read it. And it's in our statutes right now. It's just on hold because it was deemed unconstitutional.
Jim, did you want to speak further to that?
I wanted to just say we've posted a post on our websites on the front page about why homeschooling families should support school choice. And there are states that are including homeschooling families in their school choice bills without in any way encroaching upon their rights and freedoms as parents. And we mentioned some of those states there, so I just add that as a resource for homeschooling families considering, what they're going to do on this amendment.
Yeah, and y'all have a number of great resources on Amendment 2, an FAQ.
Yeah.
What's your website?
Yeah, and I have a few copies of this here, but it's bips.org, BIPPS.org. And we have, I think there's 16 questions here. We've really worked to make these very, very readable and understandable. These are not technical answers. These are hopefully things you could take and give as a resource to folks who maybe we can't talk to like this in a setting like this, but you have a chance to influence them. You can download it from there, and we have a QR code to a longer version if you want to see what all the sources are for our information. But I would say on here, and I get chastised for not actually reading what the amendment actually says, and I'll just read the first sentence of what the amendment would actually say, and we have the language on here, but it would say the General Assembly may. Just humor me, everybody say may. That doesn't say must. It doesn't say they have to. It just says they may. The General Assembly may provide financial support for the education of students outside the system of common schools. That's what it says. And I would just urge you to help people understand what this amendment does not do. This amendment does not determine policy. And Senator Tichenor, I appreciate so much what the legislature's done on this, but I want to see us have very robust school choice policies. But that's a decision for the legislature. That's their constitutional duty. We don't determine policy at the ballot. This amendment would simply say that our state constitution cannot be interpreted as prohibiting the kinds of school choice policies we find in 48 other states. And that's all it does. The policy that would be created would be done as legislators debate it in the future and as they bring stakeholders to the table, and there's a lot of discussion about this. But if we don't pass this, we can't even have the discussion. The discussion comes to an end. So if you're happy with the majority of Kentucky students not reaching proficiency in math and reading and science, and you think we're fine, and we've more than doubled spending, we're spending $21,000 per pupil across the state, inflation adjusted, by the way, $21,000 per pupil. Most private schools are doing it for about half that. So But if you're happy with where we are, please vote against this. If you think we're in the right place, then vote against it. But otherwise, this is what we want to see happen. So, yeah.
Originally, Martin Cothran was supposed to moderate this panel, and I bring that up again because I think it's really been interesting to see the opponents, and particularly the hostile media, ramp up attacks on Christian education specifically as it relates to this debate. And I'm specifically referring to the series of hit pieces that the Courier-Journal recently ran on the Highlands Latin School, where Martin has been in the leadership there, I think, since its inception, or close there too. Obviously, he's been involved with the Family Foundation. They directly attacked that school because it is Christian, because it is being effective, and it is influencing other Christian schools in the classical model of education across the nation. And I bring that up because I think for us as Christians, believers in this room, it's a really stark reminder of the worldview battle that is actually happening right now in this education context. More and more parents, even here in Kentucky without school choice, more and more parents are realizing that they need to align the education of their child with the values that they have. And they're not finding that sometimes in the public school system. But the media and those that are supporting the continued status quo seem to be quite threatened by the continued growth of various education models. So I just bring that up to Sharon. I'm going to ask Jesse this question. Why do you think, and anyone can jump in, what are the real stakes in Amendment 2 as it relates to the ability of Christian education in Kentucky as it relates to Amendment 2?
So the reason you see these intense attacks on Christians and Christian schools in the lead up to this vote is, I think people who are influenced by the education establishment realizes that if more Christian schools, if more churches have opportunities to provide Christian education to their kids, it means more families are going to take advantage of those opportunities because more families are going to be able to afford those opportunities. And what happens when kids leave the government schools and they go into private schools, specifically Christian schools, is they lose their ability to influence these kids. And unfortunately, in a lot of government schools, we have seen a lot of these liberal and harmful ideologies creep into the classroom, creep into the schools. You see gender ideology creeping into school libraries, school classroom discussions. And we've taken legislative efforts to try and rein that in, but we can only do so much legislatively. You can only have so much oversight. And you have schools like Fayette County who just blatantly ignore the law. And they don't care what the law says. They're going to teach these harmful ideologies regardless of what the law says. Speaking of Fayette County, they have a new bathroom policy where they're trying to eliminate separate girls' and boys' bathrooms. So families that have kids that are in that system, specifically families that have young daughters, are going to be trapped in an environment where they don't have any other options they can afford if we don't have school choice programs for when schools adopt those outrageous policies. And so because schools in a lot of ways have been weaponized so effectively by opponents of family values and opponents of conservative values, school choice is a threat to their ability to continue using schools in those similar manners because it gives families an avenue to get their kids out of there. And it puts pressure on them because if they have competition and they're starting to have to compete with kids, they're going to have to rethink some of those strategies because if they don't, they're just going to continue to lose families who are tired of the ideologies that don't reflect their values, and they want to make sure their kids are protected from those types of things.
Yeah, we have some pretty stark examples going on right now in Fayette County, and I'm just going to share a little bit of my personal story. So, originally from Texas, always been an advocate of school choice, but my wife and I both went to public school system. We didn't envision not sending our kids to the public schools. In fact, we started our son in public school in Texas. When he was in elementary school, kindergarten, the school district that we were at, and we were at a very high-performing elementary school, the school that we were at wanted to adopt a sex education curriculum taught by Planned Parenthood and start teaching it in elementary school. It was rife with gender ideology. And I'll quote, it literally would have taught elementary school students that their biological sex is, quote, assigned to them after birth by their doctor. That's what they were going to teach. I went to one meeting that they had where they were going to show the curriculum to everyone that was there. I was already pretty familiar, unfortunately, with Planned Parenthood's curriculum. I went to the head science person of the school district afterwards and asked, and just read this and said, could you please explain to me how this unscientific gobbledygook is appropriate to teach anyone, let alone my kids? And she looked me right in the eye and said, this is what we're going to be teaching in this school district. Deal with it. I bring that up because it was an instructive moment for my wife and I. This was the very end of the kindergarten year of my son. And I remember I got in the car, I'm driving home, I called my wife, and I said, we have to find something else immediately. Like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. There was a worldview battle that was going on, and I could not allow my children to be influenced by a leadership structure. And this is not to say all the teachers bought into this. We had great teachers. But if the leadership structure of the system believed a worldview that is false, harmful, and ultimately evil, then I had a responsibility as a parent to do better for my children. Because ultimately we know that we're the ones as parents ordained by God to direct the upbringing of our children. I'm not saying that same curriculum or that same thing is going on, but it's going on in a lot of places. And the ideologies behind it are driving a lot of of these debates that we've been involved in the General Assembly. So I want to, I know, Senator Tichenor, you have been a champion, not just talking about educational freedom, but we care about what's happening in our public schools too. I just want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your continued work to ensure that we protect kids from harmful ideologies and things in schools so that we can teach kids what need to be taught in the schools.
Yes, so SB 150 was a lot of that effort to try and curtail some of the really what is their religious ideology, that we are not created male and female. There truly is an effort to wipe out the truth of how we were created, and especially the idea that we could have been created in general, and that there is a God in and of itself. It's really interesting, the journey that got me to understand what we're up against, and what you're talking about is comprehensive sex education, which has been making its move across the nation. And it is in some of our districts in Kentucky for sure. It's definitely in our largest district. I wouldn't doubt it's probably in Fayette County as well. And part of SB 150 was to stop that so that children, at minimum, children 5th grade and under, were not getting any of that. And it was coming in at later ages with parental consent, not that they just had to opt in, not opt out. So that was a little trick in the language that's really, really important. I would encourage all grandparents and parents, make sure you're paying attention to the emails that come to you. It used to be that they would just send an email, and if you didn't tell them no, they got it. Well, now you actually have to opt in. You have to say you want to be a part of that. So that was a really important piece of that legislation. But that comprehensive sex ed is truly a movement that has birthed from many, many years ago with Alfred Kinsey and the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. And it is such a distorted version of the truth. They twisted all of this research, which really wasn't research. It was very criminal acts against children and sexual abuse, and they called it data, and it shifted and created really the sexual revolution in the United States entirely. And they knew that they had to get it through the school system for it to be completely bought in. And so they did. And so that's where our sex ed curriculums came from. And it is an interesting thing when you start to battle that beast, you see who's behind it really quick. And really the veil comes off and you realize you are dealing with a spiritual issue more than anything else. And that really was the battle of SB 150. And it still is. And we're still fighting to get our schools to actually follow that law, and we're not really having a lot of success in that. And the bathroom issue in Fayette County is another one. It's not just Fayette County. They've created this new open concept bathrooms where your bathrooms are just open in the hall and anybody can go in, and then you come out and wash your hands in front of everybody with lockers right there. And, you know, as a girl, I've been through the time of adolescence when you're just, totally embarrassed, your body's changing, and you're going to have to go to the bathroom in front of a hall full of kids. It's absolutely humiliating for girls to have to go through something like that. So it's an interesting redirection of boys and girls bathrooms, and the movement behind that is, I just think it's evil. It's an attempt to just devalue us as girls and as women, and unfortunately we have to keep fighting this battle.
Absolutely. Jim, two questions as we approach the end here. One forward-looking, well, actually both forward-looking. So, Amendment 2 passes. What would you like to see Kentucky move forward with? And then coupled with that, Amendment 2 doesn't pass. What does education in Kentucky look like?
Good questions. And I just want to say, David, in the situation you were in Texas, imagine being in that situation but not being able to do anything different for your child. So we know that that's happening in West Louisville and many other places in our state. Pastor Stevenson would have talked about that. What I'd like to see happen, I would like to see the most robust education freedom policy in the country, to the point where we attract economic growth and population like the states we're competing with have. All of them have robust school choice programs. There are over 300,000 kids in charter schools in our surrounding states this very day. This went to school there yesterday. And so I would like to see all parents, no matter what their income levels, have some access. I think it's really important that everybody have access. Now, we're probably not going to get there right away, but at the very least, we need to start with giving parents without the income to give their children something different. We need to give them the options right away that they need. By the way, it's not true that we don't have school choice in Kentucky. We do have school choice in Kentucky. If you're wealthy, you have all the choice you want. They exercise it every day. You can take your child to a different school district, you can move to a better school district, or you can write that check for tuition. So there is school choice. The other question was,
If it doesn't pass, where
if it
does
doesn't
Kentucky?
pass. So I may have a bit of good news here for you, and it's going to depend on what our Supreme Court does. The Kentucky Supreme Court right now has not heard the charter school case, and Senator Tichenor talked about that legislation that was passed. I would highly encourage you to get on our website at bips.org and read the amicus brief that Chad Meredith, the former Solicitor General under Governor Bevin, wrote. By the way, the same Chad Meredith who was on a short list for federal judgeships was going to be nominated, and even the Biden administration was going along with it until the hard left found out that he had made comments in favor of pro-life policy, and they got him removed. But he's on that list. That's how great of a legal mind he is. But you should read that about what the founders of our Commonwealth meant when they were talking about common schools and when they did those sections of the Constitution. You want to hear something really ironic? Do you think that the founders and the ratifiers of that Constitution in 1891 were sitting around saying, golly gee, I wonder how we can prevent parents in 2024 from having education freedom for their children? Do you really think they were doing that? But even more than that, what they were actually concerned about was that there would be attempts to raise additional taxes on parents for education that were not necessary. They were actually saying that Kentuckians were taxed enough already, and therefore they wanted to limit the taxation. That was what the issue was about, and that's what that amicus brief talks about, and it makes a great case for charter schools. So if the amendment doesn't pass, and the Supreme Court will pay attention to our argument, and they will understand that charter schools are public schools, by the way, everyone, public schools. And you know, our governor says, I'm for public dollars going to public schools. Well, why not charter schools? Those are public schools. But the problem is they deliver education in a different way, and they don't want anything done differently. They want to maintain the status quo. But if the amendment doesn't pass and the Supreme Court overturns the ruling of a judge elected by the public education establishment and unions in Frankfurt, then we will at least have some public options, I believe, in our state called charter schools, which are doing a great job of educating the kids that our traditional schools just can't seem to figure out how to educate. So, thank you. And thank you for having me today.
No.
Great
Thank
being
you,
here.
thank you.
And congratulations on 35 years. How great is that?
We appreciate
Great job. Thank you.
All right, Jesse, you're going to close us quickly. A couple weeks away from Election Day, what can people do to get involved to support school choice? I'm seeing some yes on 2 yard signs. Are there some here in the building?
Yes, so we have 2 resources. Number one, yes on 2 yard signs that are out there. We also have our Facts on Amendment 2 handout that explains the do's and the don'ts of what Amendment 2 does and does not do to help cut through some of the lies from the opposition. It also includes the ballot language that you will see on your ballot come November. So please pay special attention to that. In terms of what y'all can do to help out this effort, put a yard sign out. Having public exposure helps a lot. Also, Americans for Prosperity is knocking doors, making phone calls right now, and they will be doing so through the election. So if you would be interested in helping out in that aspect, please see us, and we will direct you to their team, because they do need volunteers to help. Their goal is to hit 250,000 doors before November. They're on pace, but they need all the help they can get, especially in your local communities. And then also, please be sharing our information with your families, with your friends, with your churches and your church communities, because there is a lot of false information out there, and there's a lot of fear-mongering out there, and we need good people to come in with good information and reassure them that this isn't about destroying public schools. This is about empowering parents, empowering students, and making sure that every single Kentucky kid can receive the best education possible. So please do anything you can to get the word out before November, because the other side is doing all they can to make sure that this thing gets defeated. And so we need our people to be out there and doing everything they can to make sure we can get this across the finish line.
One quick plug, Kentucky's Voice Radio. We started in Louisville, 11 to noon. We had David Walls on with me yesterday. 11 to noon every weekday. Check it out if you're from Louisville, and you can hear it on kyvoice.org. Thank you.
One more thing that I forgot as well. We are looking for people who are willing to submit letters to the editor, to their local newspaper. There's a lot of anti-Amendment 2 letters that are going out right now, and we need to combat those messages in the local papers, because people still do read those. It might be starting to go away, but people do read them, and we need pro-Amendment 2 stories out there. So also with that, if anyone would be interested in helping out with submitting a letter to the editor, we have resources to help you out. See one of our staff members or send us an email, and we can get those resources to you.
No, you were joking. Oh, okay. All right. Well, will you join me in thanking our final panel for this important conversation on Amendment 2?